So hello people in the land of the internet who want to listen to my sermon. So this morning I'd like to talk about what it means to be called and what that might mean for those of us who follow Christ. What might it mean to be called? What might it mean for God to speak to us and to ask us to do something? And we start off with this familiar story we've got in our gospel today. Something we've probably all seen acted out in a nativity play or some other thing. A pretty girl all dressed in white being Gabriel. Of course it's a girl always in the nativity. Obviously Gabriel's the man in the story, but we'll leave that to one side. There's all sorts of things in the nativity play that aren't really there, but that's a different sermon. So we'll see this in nativity plays, we'll see it in art. You may very well have a Christmas card somewhere on your mantelpiece or on your door, wherever you put your Christmas cards, with a beautiful angel appearing to a beautiful lady, picturing this scene. But I think I would like to break down this passage into the 5 acts or the 5 stages of the journey that Mary goes on as part of her calling, and to see what we might be able to learn from the way that Mary deals with this situation and how that might translate into the way that we might deal with a similar situation or our situation. So the first stage in Mary's journey is that she is perplexed. That's her initial reaction to Gabriel. It's a slightly odd word, perhaps not a word we often use. Puzzled, maybe you might prefer. Something's going on beyond her understanding. And there are lots of different ways that we can react when we find things that we don't understand. Sometimes when we're perplexed or confused, our initial reaction can be to pull away, to declare something beyond our understanding. In the words of Winnie the Pooh, to declare that we're bears of very little brain and this is far beyond us. Or whoever your favourite person is that just says, this is too much for me to understand, I'm perplexed, I'm just not going to bother thinking about it. But fortunately Mary, who after all is a very humble girl from Nazareth, probably not very well educated, but if Mary can deal with something that's perplexing and take it in her stride, I'm sure we've all got the brain power to do something. So the next stage that Mary takes is pondering. Pondering, quite a quaint word I like to think. Something about pondering that is sort of weighing things up in a balance. Or perhaps we might just like to use a word like thinking, something a bit more simple. Her reaction of the shock of Gabriel's message is to spend some time thinking, wondering what sort of greeting this might be. There's a lot to take in, but her brave approach is not to run away, but to stay into that moment and to see where that pondering might take her. The next step on the journey for Mary is to listen. Gabriel continues his message, detailing what is about to happen, reassuring her not to be afraid, and announcing the great things she has been asked to participate in, to be part of the great story of the Incarnation. It can often be difficult for us to listen to others, to hear a new viewpoint, to hear something we've never heard before. Obviously I wrote the sermon on Friday, so we'll just carry on. Of course, in the run-up to Christmas, spending time with or speaking with our families, we may hear the same old time-honoured stories, the stories that come out every year. One of the great sadnesses this year is I won't get to hear my dad's Christmas stories that he tells every single year, and I have to listen to, and we all politely listen to and groan at him as he tells them. But there's something about listening to those stories, and there's probably a reason why Dad tells those stories, and I probably ought to listen more attentively to work out why it is he must tell them. After the attentive listening, the next stage that Mary goes on to is to question. She asks the question. She's just been told something that she thinks is impossible. How can she conceive a child when she hasn't done the things necessary for that to happen in the normal way of things? Perfectly natural to want to put a barrier in the way, to limit the power of God. But Mary is gently corrected, taking the example of her cousin Elizabeth, who is also embarking on a miraculous pregnancy. We heard a bit about that last week. But the final stage for Mary is obedience. Here I am, the servant of the Lord. Let it be with me according to your word. The remarkable power of Mary saying yes. It unleashes the Word made flesh into the world. Mary's act of obedience echoes through the ages. Having gone through the stages from perplexity, through pondering, listening and questioning, she comes to the point where she acts. offering to be a servant of the Lord in bringing about his plan. This all may seem a bit far-fetched and well away from our own experience of God. We may think it unlikely that God will want to call upon us in this way, or perhaps in any way at all. Perhaps we are happiest watching and cheering on from the sidelines, not wanting the call to serve on the front line. That may all be fine, but it misses something fundamental about what it means to be a person of faith. When we are baptized and confirmed, it is not a passive act. It is about marking ourselves out as followers of Christ, whether that's a decision made by our parents or a decision we make for ourselves. The sign of the cross that we receive puts us on the front line to live our lives as followers of Christ. We'll often find ourselves perplexed. We all have our thoughts of doubts about God's existence. Events happen around us and to those that are close to us, or global events can shake our faith in the God of love. How do we deal with that perplexity? How do we attend to it when we see our friends and family having similar doubts or difficulties? What are those other things we might be perplexed about? Are we perplexed why there are so few of us in church this morning? Are we perplexed why we find it so difficult to raise money as a church? Are we perplexed about something else going on in this community? And what might it mean to be perplexed and to admit that we're perplexed by it and that we might need to attend to it? And that might lead us to pondering, something that I'm quite fond of doing. I have a bit of those of you who believe in personality types, I've done some personality type testing, and one of the things that it revealed to me, and something that I have to guard against, is I make decisions very, very quickly. I make almost instant decisions about things. I'm strongly J, if you understand what that means in Myers-Briggs personality types. But because I know that is my tendency, I have to correct that. Because I know I make snap judgments, I have to step back from my judgments at times and to ponder, because often my snap judgments aren't right. I have to spend time pondering, and sometimes that pondering leads to me to having to change my mind because I've got it wrong in that first instance. It's not an excuse, but just part of being self-aware and understanding how my brain works. And sometimes it doesn't work in the way that it ought to. And pondering is a large part of that. When I find something perplexing, when I don't understand something, spending time thinking and pondering it is a really important thing. I've still got a long list of things I'm still perplexed by and still pondering, but it doesn't stop me continuing. And then that most important act, I think, of Mary is the listening. Listening isn't an easy thing to do, particularly if we want to listen attentively. To listen beyond the words that are being said and to pick up what is going on in the background. We may think that listening is an easy skill, but as somebody who continues to learn and is still not very good at listening but continues to try to be a better listener, I don't think it's very easy. Maybe you find it much easier than I do. But the more I listen, the better I get at it. Allowing ourselves to listen and not to be thinking about what we want to say in response to somebody or to butt in with our own experience can be a tremendously rewarding way of bringing about this better listening. How might we listen to those who might have some wisdom about what's going on, those things which perplex us? The other act that Mary reminds us is it's okay to question. It's an important reminder that we don't just have to take things on trust, and we can ask a question. The ministry team might not be able to give you an immediate answer if you ask us a question, but we're always happy to have a conversation. And there's probably other people in the church family who might be able to help you with your questioning or whatever those issues might be. And that final act, perhaps the most brave and the most difficult act of all, is to be obedient. To have heard what has been asked and to respond as servants of God, that's a really brave thing to do. Mary is extraordinarily brave in taking that on. Those of us who have been baptised, confirmed, those of us who have affirmed our faith, have been called by God. And we should be attentive to God, and we should be ready to act and to be obedient when we hear God's voice, to understand what God might be calling us to. What might God be calling us to do today? What might God be calling us to do in this village? What might God be calling us to do in this land? What might God call us to do in this world? It's as unlikely to have a quite as clear message as Mary did with an angel appearing to us. But I believe that we are all called by God and should be attentive to that voice. We'll need the support of the church around us and folk around us in order to help us discern those calls. But who knows where that obedience and that openness to God will take us and where it might take our church. Amen.